All right, so we're going deep this time, comparing Western and Chinese philosophical traditions.
Right.
A lot to unpack here, even for someone like yourself who's really steeped in this stuff. I mean, at first glance, they seem so different, right? Like,
Yeah.
one's all about big arguments and systems, and the other one is about wisdom and how to actually live.
Yeah, that's usually where people start. But I
Yeah.
think the further you go, the more you realize it's not really either. It's more about both hand.
Yeah.
You know? Like, take the idea of the self, for example. Western philosophy really emphasizes that individual autonomy, that Cartesian self. Totally separate, distinct.
Right.
But Confucianism really changes that up. The self there is relational. It's defined by all its roles and duties within the family and within society. It's like everyone's a note,
Yeah.
in one big melody, and only makes sense with all the other notes around it.
I like that musical metaphor.
Yeah,
It makes a lot of sense. It's not just a bunch of soloists. It's an entire symphony working together.
exactly. And that difference, like in how they view things, really shapes their whole approach to ethics. So you have Western philosophy, particularly more modern Western philosophy, and they often prioritize, individual rights and freedoms.
Right.
But Confucianism, it focuses on responsibilities, cultivating virtues, things like filial piety, benevolence, creating a harmonious social order where everyone is playing their part beautifully.
But doesn't that sound like it could lead to maybe suppressing individual expression or dissent? Where's the room for people who want to challenge the norm, or do their own thing?
That's a really important question, and it's one that people have been debating for centuries, Even within Confucianism itself, think about the tension between Mencius and Zunzi.
Okay.
Mencius thought we were all innately good, but Zunzi said, not so much our nature needs to be shaped by education and ritual.
Right.
It highlights that constant struggle between what the individual wants and what the community needs.
Yeah, and that tension is something we're still dealing with today, right?
Yeah.
Like, how much individual freedom do we give up for the sake of stability in society? It's a tough question. No easy answers.
Yeah.
But speaking of different approaches, where does Taoism fit into all of this? It seems to have a whole other outlook on ethics, right? One that's less about rules and more about, like, going with the flow of the universe.
Yeah, definitely. Taoism makes us really rethink what we think morality even is. It's not about those strict categories of good and bad. It's more about understanding that everything is connected and you're acting in a way that is both effortless and effective.
So we're talking about Wu Wei, right?
Yes.
Effortless action, which people often think means just being passive.
Right.
But it's a lot more nuanced than that. It's more about moving with things, adapting to whatever's happening instead of trying to force things to go your way.
Exactly. It's like being a really good sailor who's out on a stormy sea. They don't fight the wind and the waves. They use their knowledge and intuition to use those forces to guide the ship, to where it needs to go.
Wow, that's a great image. It really helps me understand Wu Wei as this balance between what you intend and accepting what is. Between acting with skill and letting go of control.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, how can we as philosophers today,
Yeah.
in the modern world, use these ancient insights in our own thinking?
Well, I don't think it's about just saying, okay, we're only going to do this one tradition and forget about the rest.
Right.
It's more about appreciating what each approach is good at, recognizing our own cultural biases, and then seeing how these philosophies that look so different can actually help and inform each other.
So we're talking about getting more tools in our philosophical toolbox.
Yeah.
Adding new ways of looking at the world, new concepts to think about, new perspectives to challenge what we think we know. And for a philosopher, what could be more exciting?
Yeah, it's like finding a whole new continent of thought with its own landscapes, languages, ways of understanding what it means to be human. It's a journey, and it can challenge all those deep assumptions we have about reason and morality and like the nature of reality itself. Take, for instance, the idea of losing Confucianism. Okay.
People translate it as ritual propriety, but it's so much deeper than just having good manners. It's about living out those ethical principles through what you do.
Yeah.
Making them like a living expression of respect and care.
So it's not just about knowing what's right. It's about actually being that way,
So?
expressing that awareness ethically in everything you do, every interaction. It's almost like an art form.
Exactly.
Like you're shaping not just how you act, but your whole character.
Yes. Think of that Japanese tea ceremony. All those carefully planned movements. Each element means something. It's not just about the tea itself. It's about being mindful, respecting things, appreciating that everything's connected.
Yeah,
So it's like in action.
that's a really good example. And it makes me think about how important ritual is to how Confucians see moral development. They weren't just, philosophers sitting around thinking. They really wanted to figure out how to make people virtuous and to build a harmonious society.
Absolutely. And that's where the whole Mencius and Zunzi debate gets really interesting.
All right. Mencius was all about those sprouts of goodness, the ones we're all born with.
Hmm.
He thought if we learned and reflected and actually did good things, we could grow that potential for compassion and righteousness and wisdom that's already inside us.
Like a gardener taking care of a plant.
Exactly. Give it the right environment and it'll flourish and reach its full potential.
I see.
But since he had a different take, remember? He thought humans weren't so great naturally.
Right.
We're selfish, and if we don't do something about it, it'll be chaos. So he said ritual and social norms and education, those are the ways to shape how we behave and lead us toward being virtuous.
So it's less about nurturing what's already inside and more like sculpting something from the outside, using forces to shape it into something good.
Yes.
I bet that had a big impact on how they thought about education and social policies.
Definitely. Mencius probably wanted an education system that focused on individual character and moral reasoning.
Makes sense.
Whereas Zunzi would say, no, it's about discipline and following tradition and having strong social structures that guide behavior.
It's amazing how these old debates are still relevant today when we talk about education or social engineering. Do we focus on what's inside each person, or do we try to shape how people act using rewards and punishments? It's something societies are still wrestling with today.
And it's something that Western philosophy has thought about too, though maybe with a different focus. Think about the Enlightenment thinkers who believed in reason shaping people and societies. Or the utilitarians who wanted to maximize happiness by creating good laws and social policies.
Right. And even now, we see these different ways of thinking in politics and how we raise our kids, even in our own personal philosophies. Are we good deep down, or do we need rules to keep us in line? It really gets to the heart of what it means to be human.
And this brings us back to that question we started with. Can we really compare these philosophical traditions?
Right.
They might use different words, metaphors, starting points, but in the end, they're all trying to answer those big questions. What's a good life? How do we become virtuous? What's our relationship to everyone else and to the universe?
It seems like just by comparing them, even when they seem completely opposite, it can really shed new light on those core questions.
Right.
Like looking at something through different colored filters. The same image, but it looks different depending on the filter.
Exactly. That's the magic of comparing philosophies. It's not about saying one's better or trying to fit them into neat little boxes. It's about opening our minds, challenging what we think we know, realizing that this human search for meaning and wisdom, it's a lot more diverse and complex than we might think.
And speaking of diversity, we've been talking mostly about Confucianism,
Yeah.
which is just one part of Chinese thought.
Yeah.
We mentioned Taoism. But there's so much more to discover, all these different schools and ideas just waiting.
Oh, yeah. We haven't even gotten to legalism, which is all about the power of the state and strict laws, or Mohism and their idea of universal love. And even within Confucianism and Taoism, there are so many variations and interpretations that have popped up over time.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about how much philosophical thought there is in both East and West. Over thousands of years.
It really makes you realize how much there is to learn. And it shows how we need to be humble and curious when we're comparing these different ways of thinking. We need to be ready to let go of our preconceived notions.
That's a good point. It's not about mastering these traditions. It's about letting them master us, letting them change how we understand ourselves and the world. And that brings up something I've been thinking about this whole time. We've talked about how these traditions can learn from each other, how they can give us new tools to think with. But what about actually putting them into practice? How can we use this ancient wisdom to deal with the problems we have today in the 21st century?
That's a big question. One we could spend a whole other deep dive on. But I think the first thing is to see that these old philosophies are still relevant to us now.
Oh, okay.
For example, Confucians really emphasized social harmony and responsibility.
Right.
And that has a lot to teach us today about how to build strong communities and deal with the challenges of a globalized world.
And the Taoist idea of wu wei, about being adaptable and going with the flow. That could be really helpful for dealing with all the uncertainty and change that's happening so fast with technology and everything. And just finding some balance in this world that's constantly demanding our attention.
Exactly. It's not about just copying what they did back then or forcing ourselves into their social structures. It's about taking the basic principles, the core ideas, and figuring out how to use them in creative ways to deal with the specific problems of our time.
So it's like taking an ancient seed and planting it in today's world.
Yes.
Nurturing it to grow into something new and strong, something that can feed and support us as the world keeps changing.
That's beautiful. And it really shows the power of philosophy. It goes beyond time and place. It can offer guidance and inspiration for generations to come. It's a conversation that never really ends, a search for wisdom that keeps going with each new generation, each new encounter with the unknown.
And that's maybe the most important thing we can take away from this deep dive into comparing philosophies. It's not about having all the answers or saying one tradition is better than the others. It's about the journey itself, the constant conversation between different ways of knowing, the never-ending search for understanding.
It's about realizing that this human need to find meaning. It's a huge and complicated tapestry made up of threads from all these different cultures and traditions and points of view, and it's in how those threads weave together in the clash and the harmony of ideas. That's where we find the real richness and complexity of this whole philosophical adventure.
It's pretty amazing for us as philosophers. It's like we've been given this map to all these hidden philosophical pathways, connections we might never have found if we just stayed in our own little philosophical neighborhoods.
Exactly. And it's not just about learning more stuff, it's about getting better at thinking critically. When we look at all these different philosophical systems, it forces us to question what we think we know, to see things in new ways.
Yeah, you're right. It's like that classic thought experiment. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to hear it, does it make a sound? A Western philosopher might start talking about the physics of sound waves.
Right.
But a Taoist might ask, what's the sound of one hand clapping? They both make you think, but in totally different ways.
That's a great example. Comparing philosophies makes us look not just at what we believe, but why we believe it. Why are some things more important to us than others? Why do we see ethical problems the way we do? These traditions are like mirrors, they show us our own biases and how our culture has shaped our thinking. It can be humbling.
Yeah, for sure. It makes me think about how the language we use shapes how we see the world philosophically. We've kind of touched on this.
Yeah.
But it's obvious that translating words like ren or wu wei, you're never going to get a perfect match. It's like trying to describe a rainbow using only a few crayons.
Exactly. Language isn't just some neutral tool. It comes with all these cultural assumptions and ways of looking at things built in. So when you're comparing philosophies, part of it is understanding the limits of translation, knowing that some ideas just don't fit neatly into categories.
It's like those optical illusions, where you can see the same picture in more than one way.
Yeah.
Comparative philosophy helps us see those other ways of looking at things, those little differences that we might miss otherwise.
And those little differences can lead to some really profound insights. For example, look at how Confucianism relates to modern psychology. Some psychologists are finding that Confucian ideas about the relational self and social harmony, they actually line up with current research on well-being and mental health.
That's really interesting. It makes you think that these ancient traditions might have some valuable clues for dealing with the big problems we face today. Things like social isolation and political polarization.
Yeah, it's not about saying the past was perfect or that these traditions have all the answers. It's about recognizing the wisdom they offer, their understanding of what it means to be human, and seeing how those insights can inform our own thinking and make it richer.
It's like when archaeologists dig up old artifacts and suddenly we understand history better. That's what comparing philosophies is like, digging through layers of thought, finding hidden connections, discovering new ways to look at those timeless questions that are always with us.
And the best part is it's like a dig that never ends. There's always more to uncover, more to learn, more to question. It's a journey without a finish line. You're always exploring and growing.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm feeling kind of awestruck and excited. Awestruck by how vast and complex philosophical thought really is. And excited about keeping this journey going, about digging deeper into these traditions and seeing where they take us.
It's been great exploring all this with you. And to everyone listening, keep going on this adventure. Don't be afraid to question what you think you know, to embrace the things you don't understand, to see the world through all these different philosophical lenses. Because ultimately, the best reward isn't about getting all the answers. It's about growing our capacity for wonder, for thinking critically, for understanding more deeply.
Well said. And on that note, that's a wrap for our deep dive into comparing Western and Chinese philosophical traditions. Until next time, keep those philosophical gears turning.